Some people only respect you when they still have control over you. And the moment you stop giving them emotional access, suddenly they misunderstand everything you say. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of the time, they were never misunderstanding you at all. Maybe you've experienced this before. You explain yourself carefully. You choose your words gently. You try not to sound aggressive. You try not to hurt anyone. You try to keep the peace. But somehow, they still twist your words. They still act offended. They still make you feel guilty for having boundaries. And after a while, you begin questioning yourself. Maybe I'm too sensitive. Maybe I explained it badly. Maybe I'm the problem. But read that again carefully, because this is where manipulation quietly begins. Toxic people rarely control others through force. Most of them do it through confusion. And confusion becomes powerful when you are the kind of person who desperately wants to be understood. That's why over-explainers are often easy targets, not because they are weak, but because they believe clarity automatically creates fairness. And unfortunately, some people are not trying to understand you fairly. They are trying to maintain access to you emotionally. There's a difference. Have you noticed how certain people only misunderstand boundaries? Not favors, not access, not your generosity, only boundaries. You can give endlessly, and suddenly communication is perfectly clear. But the moment you say, "I can't do that anymore," now they're confused. Now they're hurt. Now you're cold. Now you've changed. That's not misunderstanding. That's resistance. And the dangerous part is, kind people often mistake resistance for emotional depth. So they keep explaining, longer texts, longer conversations, longer emotional labor, hoping that one more explanation will finally make the other person understand. But what if understanding was never the issue? What if the issue was control? Think about how many times you apologized just to end tension, even when deep down, you knew you were not wrong. Think about how many times you explained your feelings to someone who had already decided not to care. That is what emotionally exhausting relationships look like. You keep trying to reach a person who benefits from pretending not to hear you. And the more effort you give, the more emotionally trapped you become. Because now you are not only defending your boundaries, you are defending your right to have them. That changes your entire emotional position. Now, instead of standing firm, you are negotiating your worth. And toxic people notice that immediately. The moment they realize guilt works on you, they use more guilt. The moment they realize silence makes you anxious, they use silence. The moment they realize you fear disappointing people, they weaponize disappointment. This is why emotional manipulation can feel so confusing. It doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks like sadness. Sometimes it looks like disappointment. Sometimes it looks like someone saying, "I just thought you cared about me." And because you are a good person, you instantly feel pressure. Pressure to explain. Pressure to prove yourself. Pressure to reassure them. But healthy relationships do not constantly require emotional performances. Healthy people do not need you to abandon yourself in order to keep the peace. Read that again. Because many people were raised to believe that self-sacrifice is love, that suffering quietly is maturity, that constantly tolerating disrespect makes you a good person. But it doesn't. It only teaches people that your limits can be ignored. And once someone becomes comfortable disrespecting your boundaries, they rarely stop on their own. That's why emotionally strong people eventually become calmer. Not louder, not crueler, calmer. Because they finally understand something important. Every reaction gives people information. Every emotional over-explanation reveals fear, and manipulative people study fear very carefully. Have you ever noticed how certain people become uncomfortable when you stop reacting emotionally? Suddenly they push harder. Suddenly they become more dramatic. Suddenly they accuse you of changing. Why? Because calmness removes confusion, and confused people are easier to control. The strongest manipulators are not always loud. Sometimes they look caring. Sometimes they look wounded. Sometimes they make you feel selfish for protecting your own peace. That's why guilt is one of the most powerful emotional weapons in unhealthy relationships. Because guilt keeps good people negotiating against themselves. Healthy people respect your limits. Manipulative people punish them. And this next part is where many people finally wake up. You begin noticing a strange pattern. The people who truly care about you usually adjust. But the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries become emotional the moment you change. Not because they lost you, because they lost access to the version of you that ignored your own needs to keep everyone comfortable. That version was easier to control. And maybe the hardest truth of all, some people were never attached to your personality. They were attached to your patience, your availability, your forgiveness, your emotional reactions. They liked the version of you that tolerated everything quietly, because that version made their life easier. But the moment you stop shrinking yourself, their misunderstanding suddenly becomes much louder. And this is the moment many people begin seeing relationships differently. They realize something painful. Not everyone who stays close to you actually respects you. Some people stay close because your lack of boundaries benefits them. That realization changes everything, because now you stop chasing validation. You stop defending every decision. You stop explaining your pain to people committed to misunderstanding it. And strangely enough, that is usually the moment your presence becomes stronger, calmer, more respected, more difficult to manipulate. The strongest people are not the ones who win every argument. They are the ones who stop needing permission to protect their peace. They stop begging people to understand boundaries that should already be obvious. They stop shrinking themselves just to avoid making uncomfortable people uncomfortable. And most importantly, they stop confusing endless tolerance with love. Because love without respect eventually becomes emotional exhaustion. You deserve relationships where communication does not feel like survival. You deserve relationships where saying no does not create emotional punishment. You deserve relationships where boundaries are respected without requiring a courtroom defense. And once you understand that, you stop wasting years trying to convince emotionally immature people to suddenly become emotionally healthy. That is not your job. Your job is to protect your peace. Your job is to protect your mind. Your job is to stop abandoning yourself just to keep difficult people comfortable. Because the truth is, the people who genuinely value you usually do not need endless explanations to respect you. But the people who benefit from your confusion will always demand one more conversation, one more justification, one more emotional performance. And if you are not careful, you can spend years trapped in that cycle, trying to prove your intentions to people who already decided to misunderstand them. That is why emotionally mature people eventually learn the power of calm detachment. Not coldness, not cruelty, clarity. The clarity to realize not every misunderstanding is innocent, not every apology is necessary. Not every relationship deserves unlimited access to your energy. And once that realization becomes real to you, your entire life changes. You speak differently. You react differently. You stop fearing disapproval. You stop feeling responsible for everyone's emotional comfort. And ironically, that is often when people begin respecting you more. Because people notice when someone no longer negotiates their self-worth. People notice when someone becomes emotionally grounded. People notice when guilt no longer controls them. That quiet strength changes the energy of every room you walk into. And if this video resonated with you, watch the next video. People quietly test you every day. Because once you understand the small ways people test your boundaries, you start seeing social dynamics very differently forever.